for joining us today. I'm here with my guitar player, Tom Lane, and we've just been going over a little bit of hiding place. Tom has traveled all over the world with me, and we want to talk about the importance today of a guitar player, what he does in a worship setting, but more importantly, we're going to also talk about just some practical techniques. How do you get the sounds you're getting? How do you get the tones? And Tom is a well-known guitar clinician. So I'm going to kind of turn him loose and try to not give a lot of input because you don't need my input, but just really dig into how you do what you do, and how you get your tones, how you get your sounds, talk about the styles that are popular today, and just turn it over to you. So help me welcome my good friend, Tom Lane.
Thank you, Don. Well, it's a privilege to get to travel with Don, and starting there is with guitar is an important thing because who you're working with and the reason that you're there has a lot to do with what you do as a player. So we're going to talk today a little bit about sounds and tone, and using the tools you have and creating atmosphere and doing the things that is required typically of a guitar player in a lot of different settings across the board. And I'm just going to start with the very basics for me because one of the things we do is we travel a lot. Or in a lot of different countries, different settings. You don't always get the amp that you ask for or the guitar you ask for or any particular instrument, and so you make do. And one of the reasons I have a lot of pedals on a board is because you never know what you're going to get. So I'm going to start with an amp because for me, tone really does start here in your fingers, but it also is critical, the guitar you're playing. As we know, everything about the guitar affects the sound from the pickups to the wood that's used in building the guitar. So there are a lot of factors, and it's not just any guitar sounds good. And same with amps, same with pedals. So it kind of just trickles all the way down the line. I'm going to start with kind of, when I say tone, I mean a couple of different things. We obviously have sound, and we think of tone being just the different guitar tones. But before you think about tones, plural, let's talk about tone. The difference in playing a note as bland as that to a simple nuance helps define what a tone really is and what defines tone. And when you start with an amp, you've got a lot of parameters on the EQ and the control, so tone then transfers to the amp. And one of the first things I do is I without any effects on the guitar, I play a guitar direct to an amp. If it's the first thing when I get to a venue that we go to is I bypass my board, plug into my amp, and start with the tone there. Because for the guy out in front like Chuck, it's a lot, it gives him a little bit better thing to work with depending on what I give him. So as an example, I have a deluxe here. This is an old deluxe. It's my personal one that I love, but I don't always get to have it when I go. But the basics are the same. You've got bass, mid, treble on an amp. I'm using no overdrive in this amp at all, and that's typical for most settings when we go, that I'm plugging direct into a clean signal that I would like to hear it clean first. Makes sense, right? So I'm gonna dial in what I like, and typically I will roll the low end pretty far back. Even though a beefy tone is nice, oftentimes when you're switching pedals, the beef and the low end becomes part of the muddy factor. It clutters the sound. It fills up sonic space. So one of the first things I do is dial in a tone. It's not too low endy, so let me demonstrate if I had the bass a lot further up. If I were playing a real funk part, that's a nice sound, but when I go to other sounds, I want the more the mids, the highs to be clear. So I start with a basic setting of the bass rolled to 3. And so it's a little brighter. So that gives me a much better tone for cutting through in a mix, and that's important. A lot of times we have a lot of tools at our disposal, but we start clicking on pedals and playing sounds that don't translate out front at all, and we're not aware of that because we've not done the right things to examine our tone. So treble, I've got probably midway up. Take that back. I've got it even rolled down on this amp to about 3 to 4. That's usually a sweet spot, or just midway. If you start on any amp with the bass, mid, treble kind of at the at the middle position and start backing off of your low. Your mids, depending on the sounds you want, you might boost a bit, but rely on your sound man to tell you if it's sounding too mid-rangey. And then your treble, you might start in the mid, you might tweak just a little bit, 5 or 6, just above the midpoint. So that starts with a good plug in the guitar basic tone. So now I can start adding things to the mix that also help define a tone. And I'm going to demonstrate the song we were just playing, Hiding Place is a great example. We use delays. In every song you hear, there's some kind of a delay going on. So that's a critical part of a pedal board. And so I'm often asked, what do you take on, if you had to choose one pedal, what do you use? Well, if I had to use one single pedal, it'd be a delay, because most amps can get a distortion sound. So if you're stuck with just one pedal on a deserted island, that would be a good one to start with. Or if you have a few more bucks, a good pedal to start with that you could do everything with is an M9 by Line 6. So they cover all your bases for the most part in the food groups of tones. So I'm going to start with, that's what I have on this song, just to give you an example and a rundown of what I'm going into and my chaining so far in my board before we get to the part itself. Is I go into the front end of a pedal board. This is how I wire it. If you research it, there are a lot of variations. There's no hard and fast rule, but compression and distortion is typically what you would put on the front end of an amp. So I'm only going into compressor, distortion before I ever hit a volume pedal. And then I have, from there I feed the rest of the filtering effects, the time-based effects, like delays and reverbs. And then the last thing in my chain is a boost pedal by Creation Audio Labs that I like. So it just buffers the signal a little bit, kicks it back up in case you've had tone loss at all. So the only one I have on the front end right now is this little distortion pedal here, and it's basically a Klon clone that travels well by Electro Harmonics, the soul food. It's a really inexpensive, great little pedal for the money, and so it's got a slight overdrive. So the grit that you're hearing now is all coming from this little pedal here. So it's got enough of an overdrive. It's not saturated in distortion. It's just enough of a tone to give a clean distinction. But at full volume, if I were to go into a lead, it's got enough bite just to give it a little distinction in the tone, but I've not saturated it like this. Here would be that would be a much heavier sound if I were doing a more blues, rock, guitar solo type sound. But a lot of the tones you hear today are as simple as a nice little overdrive pedal, not too overdriven, into a delay pedal. So after I'm going through the overdrive to my volume pedal, now I'm feeding my delay, and all I've added so far is one delay sound from the M9. I have it set to a quarter note delay. I can tap tempo on the switch here. I just click to tap into a song. So I have it set to be for Hiding Place, and it's this simple. So you hear the delay is just pretty much a straight quarter note. And that kind of delay is used all the time, but I don't have a lot of feedback on it. And to give you an example of how best to use a delay, if I really wanted this sound to, like in this solo part, it's a very pronounced sound, and so the echo is part of that tone. If I didn't want it to be as pronounced, I would back off on the feedback, to give you an example. So now the number of repeats are less, and so you're just barely hearing it. If I were soloing, I would want less of that because I wouldn't want as much of a trail, so I'll give you that example. And that's still a lot, but there's only one repeat, so there's not a complicated reverberation thing going on. If I wanted, here's how exaggerated it could be. And so that's a lot of delay, and that's where a lot of guys tend to overdo a delay pedal. So something as a simple quarter note analog delay can turn into a mess really fast in the mix of a band if I'm trying to play a rhythm part. So So all those repeats and the feedback now become, it's a cool tone, but it gets in the way of something that's very rhythmic and where you're locking into a time. So that's just one example of using a delay. And then I'll just kind of step through a few more other things that are on the board real fast. I travel with 2 different delays, not because I can't get pretty much everything I want with an M9. I have a few schools of thoughts behind what I travel with. This is a very, it has digital delay capabilities, but Boss builds the Giga delay. I've used Boss pedals for years, and they travel well. They're hardcore, well-built pedals, so wherever I am in the world, I'm less concerned that Boss pedal is ever going to go down because I've never had one go down. And so the M9 is such a great pedal, but with all that it does, the power current around the world is not the same, so I'm a little more careful that it could, I've had one fry on me more than once, and it's just because people aren't aware of what they're plugging it into, and you have help that are trying to do their best, but it doesn't always translate that way. It doesn't always work that way. So I travel with 2 more to be able to cover bases than step on them all at the same time, and that's another mistake I think people make with effects and pedal boards is this looks great, and you can have 100 pedals on your board, but seldom are you really running more than a couple. And so I'm going to give you a demonstration of using a couple delays at a time. So there's my quarter note delay that's very basic. I'm going to kick the ED20, the Giga delay on, and all I have it set is an 1/8 note delay. So you've got a quarter and an 1/8. So you have so if you hear you have a little bit of the bouncing effect going on, and what that really helps with is if I'm doing more tone swells, just the way the delays are interacting creates very unique tones. And anymore, especially in today's modern worship kind of guitar world, you have a lot of atmospheric sounds. You have a lot of tones that are built on cool sounds. A lot of times we don't even know how we're getting them. You've got guys twisting knobs, and that's part of the fun. So to me, tone, back to that big T word, it's great that you can do all of that, but it's also very important that when you're playing a song that a part that you're trying to deliver and cover within a song doesn't become a distraction. So 2 delays could be great, but I'll give you an example. If I jacked up feedback levels and I had too much of the atmospheric going on, I couldn't be as toneful. I could be atmospheric. I could be tasteful in doing simple things and creating stuff that has a lot of life in it, ambience. But if I wanted to be more tone driven and play parts and movements, I can get in the way. So here's with a lot of delay and feedback on both of the delays. Now you can make it cool, and you can make a song out of something that you can come up with great ideas. But if I were playing, let's say, as we get into this Don song, Hiding Place, when we get to the chorus, you are my strength, oh God. Hear how messy that is? You will approve. So the delay's out of time. I've got multiple things going on. There's a lot then that's competing for that space. So if I dial it back, I'll demonstrate what I do on a chorus section of that song. First of all, I'm going to go back to the 1 delay instead of the 2. See, by hitting more diamonds on that part, which is what I'm playing like the first time around on a chorus, the delay works really well. But if I get into the chunking part, that's still okay. But what I do typically on that song is I switch delays to one that's a lot more reminiscent to this. And I'm just tweaking the same delay for an example. I've just taken the mix, which is the amount of the overall effect. I'm turning it down so that you're not hearing as much of the delay to begin with. Now you can hear it when I stop, but in the middle of the song, it's not calculating and becoming a mess. So a chunk part. So you have the delay, but it's not fighting then. So important to tone is learning how to kind of just manipulate the amount of a delay in the mix, but also the feedback and the decay. And to give you an example, if I were playing a more bluesy part of a song, I'm going to switch back to the DD20. This is that eighth note delay, very simply dialed in, not a lot of feedback. So it's barely in there. Just enough to give a little repeat, so it's great. That's what you'll hear most often on solos. Guys will dial in a very simple delay, eighth or quarter, most typically, just to give you a little bit of the trail of a note. So see, that's got a little more feedback on it. Less is a little better. So one repeat, and then it starts to trail off and you barely hear it's there. So learning to do that with your tone and matching that with fingers and nuances of bending notes, all of that kind of helps define tone. So to me, that's the starting point. You pick good sounds, you learn to manipulate them well, and that starts helping define tone. Okay, now we want to talk a little bit more about constructing parts for a song, which is essential. I'll give you an example. One of the songs that on Don's record that we co-wrote together is a song called "Uncharted Territory." Is that the title?
Yeah.
It took a while to name that one, didn't it?
Yeah.
But to give you an example, this has a riff in the beginning, which is a motif, which means a melody. So I've got a little delay, I've got a filtered effect on it to create the effect. On the record, I think it might have even been a slide, I can't remember, but it's a signature part of the song, so that's what I would call a motif. So it comes back around at the end of the song, it starts the song off, but then we're going right into a verse, and I'm going to demonstrate as we do that how I can be a little more atmospheric, and I'm going to be utilizing what we would call a pad type approach, and a term that you may or may not have heard before is a diamond, and all that really means is when you get to a chord, you hit it one time. That's a diamond. So if you ever hear somebody say diamond on the 1 or diamond on the 4, that just means when you get there, don't keep playing, just hit it and let it ring for the duration of the bar. So let's play the beginning of that intro, Don, together, that song, and I'll go from that to the atmospheric. All right.
Find myself in uncharted territory. Never felt so lost, never felt so lonely. Where are you, Lord? I'm so afraid I can feel the fear inside me. Can't control the chaos all around. Where are you, Lord? How can I sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?
So it's a good example. So far, I've not played anything that required playing multiple rhythms or notes at a time. So the diamonds and the pad created a little bit of life around a song. Not to mention, if we were in the full band setting, you would have guys in the band playing different parts. So now I'm kind of in the background creating color and texture more than I'm contributing to a part. But I am contributing as a part of the song, but I'm not dominating that part. So in the beginning of a song, typically in an intro section, you may have a lead, but you may have nothing. And so the importance of parts comes into play right from the beginning in a song. And here's how I like to think about it. I've always seen the song as being kind of a linear graph. If you picture a flat line, it needs to ebb and flow. So at the beginning of a song, as you're looking at it, songs need to do this, and they need to build, they need to come down, then they transition. And part of that journey is what helps us to build emotion and express emotion, and we feel emotion as songs do that. And so my contribution as a guitar player is important, because I'm one of the colors that's going to be painting throughout this journey on this graph. So I like to look at it like if we were sitting down to start this song, which we did in the studio, to say, okay, as a band, we're playing, here's how the song goes from the writing tape, or Don just demonstrated the song, the way it was written, and here's the way it is, but what do we want to do with it? That's typically how a song will start often in the studio, unless you have an artist or worship leader that has a very clear direction, which is awesome as well. They may say, I know exactly what I want, here's what I want here and here and here, and they spell it out for you. But most often in the studio, good producers know the benefit of having, and good artists know the benefit of having other good musicians and players contribute. And so a lot of their contributions come into play as the song evolves in a rehearsal time, playing it down. So that's where parts come into play. So as I'm listening to the song, let's say I didn't know this song, I'm hearing it for the first time, Don's saying, okay, here's the song. My first inclination is I'm going to have either a tablet or the chart out, and I'm going to be making notes. And all throughout the song, as it's evolving, I'm making notes. Okay, diamonds for the intro, that works. I don't need to do anything else. I'm diamond and pad. And so I make a little small note, diamonds, pads. It's that simple. And then I know that as it gets into the chorus, this song actually goes into a little more of a chunking part. And so at that point, I might put chunks, but let's say I get to the first chorus and I'll get in the right key. How can I forget everything you've done? So now my notes start changing. I'm not doing pads. I've backed off of the atmospheric sounds. I don't have a competing delay or anything. And I know that on the first chorus, it's chunks, or it's eighth notes. I can just make a simple note eighths, or it's quarters. And that kind of notation helps you, even in a worship setting, it helps you pay attention. I'll say this now, in most worship settings, we're reading words and chords. Oftentimes you have no idea how many bars you're sticking on one chord, because most people don't write the charts that way. What I always do for my teams is I do it like a real chart would read as much as I can. So whenever there's a symbol, and I use numbers most often in my charting, but whether it's a letter or a number, my band can know that when I write a 1, they're on that 1 for the full count of the song. So if it's 4/4, they're on at 1 bar, they're going to count 4 ticks. They know that's going to work. The next line, if it's more than one chord in a bar, I underline it. So they know that it's a split bar, and if it's not notated above, it's just an equal count for each chord. So let's say it goes from 1 for one measure, then it goes to a 4 and a 5 in the second bar. If it's underlined, you know that the 4 gets 2 counts, the 5 gets 2 counts. And so in a chart like that, as I'm making notes, I'm writing above these little notes that I'm talking about. So diamonds, chunk sounds, or eighths, let's say, and then let's say I get to a section in a song where I'm going to create another part. Maybe it's a bridge in any song, and all of a sudden I'm doing a line, or some other line. So a part can be that simple, or it can be this. A part can be constituted by anything that you come up with. Parts are often just this simple. So whatever notation you need to use is what's important. It's not so important that theoretically you need to explain that for somebody else. You need to explain it to yourself. Because the point is this to me, in worship, you've got a song. A lot of times we enter it with the approach that it's like an all skate. Okay, everybody play. First one that gets to the end wins. And that's not the way a song develops, and that doesn't make for a good song. What makes for a good song is when it's a journey, everybody's contributing, but they're being tasteful. They're listening to the other players. And so your chart and your notes become really important because you can't remember, let's say, 30 songs in a set. Don's famous for having 30 times 30 songs in a set. He's got more songs than we know what to do with. So at any point, a song can come, and especially if you have a volume of songs within a worship set, it's important that you know, going from song to song, some of the notes. So I always have a little a mental note, or I have a physical note where I've got the key, the signature, any special notes about sections in the song. And it may be that I know the entire song really well, but when it gets to the bridge, that maybe that's shaky, or I don't remember it, or we just learned the song, then I might have more of a note for that. But what's happening is I'm making parts for these songs in my mind so that when we're playing down the song, rather than just going to the end of the song, I know that I'm contributing parts. So in general, think about a song as a journey. Figure out what your color and your texture and your taste needs to be as part of the contribution.
You know, Tom, I was thinking just about uncharted territory. I mean, as a guitarist, you're kind of analyzing the lyrics of the song as well. You know, for instance, the lyrics are, you know, I find myself in uncharted territory, never felt so lost, never felt so lonely.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're playing, what you're playing there is just kind of these ethereal, just diamonds,
Yeah.
which kind of gives the impression of we're in uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And as we get to the chorus, but how can I forget all you've done for me? You know,
Yeah, actually, what I did is I'm remembering the part now is,
yeah,
well, key also is that you tune your guitar. So
Yeah.
I'll just demonstrate that right now for all you guys that don't own a tuner. Go to the store and buy one.
what kind of tuner?
You know what? I love the Boss tuners, Diodario. owns Planet Waves. They make a great one as well. I use all of their small ones. I always have a small tuner that I clip on, even though I have a pedal on the board always. And it's hardwired. It's not part of the loop or the chain. It's just always on.
And tuning, by the way, if we're doing an outdoor concert,
Yeah.
a lot of times your guitar is sitting at home, maybe in air conditioned or in your car, and you get to the stage and it's 100 degrees. So in the middle of the concert, your guitar is going to be changing tuning a lot. So, you know, again, get a good tuner.
Yeah,
and watch it.
and so I'm always tweaking that because it responds to the weather and climate. So a good example, just to stop right here before we go into part, but back to that part of a song, when it gets to the chorus, I usually have 2 or 3 sounds for a song, for each song. So I'm switching on the fly in between sounds, and that's what most players would do. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can buy loopers that help you control a lot more with just one strip of pedals or switches. You can program things in and have it done for you via MIDI. There's a lot of opportunity, but for the most part, because of the way we travel and the volume of dates, it's very meat and potatoes. I need to be able to stomp and click and it not always be the same. So in this song, see, already I've got a delay on this competing. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to cut this down. Because when we get to that chorus, and actually what I'm remembering, Don, is in the studio, rather than just chunking on that first time, we did a, how can I forget all you've done for everything you've done just to set me free. Me how to pray, teach me how to praise the dark, how to sing your song. And then there's another little motif. We introduced a new little musical signature piece at that point. But key to that is, you know, that or talking about parts, that was the part. the first time through the song, rather than playing a chunking part or overlaying a bunch of guitars. I think there were 2 guitars on the session.
Correct.
So the part I was playing was just again, diamonds. But that part worked in the song, and it didn't fight. And I can't even remember the other part that was going on, but we were listening to each other enough to know that, hey, that's cool what you're playing. Now you contribute over here doing that. And the same goes for every player in the band.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine that song without thinking it through, just picking one sound. And like you say, you see a chord and you see the lyrics, and people just start strumming away rather than thinking through the song and how you can contribute.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be even on the verses kind of boring, you know.
Yeah.
How can I sing if you were just playing the straight? Never felt so lost, never felt so lonely.
So it could be a lot busier.
Yeah, and I mean, it can work that way. But it's wow! It's so much more musical when you give it some thought and you do your diamonds again.
Yeah.
You know. How can I sing when my heart is broken? When every prayer is just a token. Where are you, Lord? Sometimes our pain can tell a tragic story. Still I will praise you and give you glory. Where are you, Lord?
So to me, it's, Don, it comes down to, as a player, we say it in every seminar, we say it in everything, but I grew up playing in bands my whole life. The first thing I ever did was we started a band in 4th grade or something. And so every jam session, we called it then, was just about us playing and listening. And so I started out listening to the other guitar player, listening to the keyboard player, the bass player, the drummer. Then we would swap instruments during our breaks in our jam sessions. But you learn to appreciate what the others are playing and listen and develop that muscle in your musical palette, of listening and being tasteful. So now contributions to any song, more than just trying to play the song from start to finish without getting the notes wrong. That's important. But if I can add anything in the context of a worship setting, that if you're going to make a contribution that is memorable, it's very important that you create parts. It's how every record is made. Throughout every session of any song I've ever heard, for the most part, that the process was that the band or the artist or the producers, whoever's involved, they sit around and at some point they figure out, what are you doing, what are you doing, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And then we come together and it sounds good. But it's because they put some thought to it. And yes, the more accomplished you become, the more experienced you become in that, it becomes a second nature. We can I love Don's band because it's great players, and it's a privilege to play with them, and we don't have to think a lot. The natural instinct with everybody in the band is to play something that's going to groove or have feel or emotion or its taste, or we like each other personally enough as brothers, but we also like what we contribute musically enough that we honor, defer, respect what somebody's doing. So it becomes even more of a pleasure to have that kind of rebounding and that kind of rapport, really, for lack of a better word. But all of it starts with having an ear to listen and contribute something to the equation, not just simply play through a song.
Yeah, I think that little motif on Uncharted Territory, I think that was actually in one of the demos that you sent in when we first started working on the song.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. This song made it to the it ended up being the title of the album, title cut. But we had everything recorded, and we hadn't finished this song. I just didn't know what to say on the choruses, and but it was kind of there. But Tom had already demoed something when we were working on it, and I think you had that motif,
Yeah.
So it was kind of there, and we took a break at the studio.
Yeah.
And lunch break, and I remember sketching out some words. What about these words? And we came back and recorded it. And
it was one of the last. That song was here again. The musical parts play a part of it, but the lyric being the one of the most important aspects of the song. It was all late coming together, but it came together. And then as you look back now, I look at the different pieces and even the other players that contributed. You love what each person added, and it supports that message here again.
And again, when you're playing guitar, when you're like Tom says, going through the song, looking at the song, look at the lyrics. What are the lyrics saying? And if if they're making a declaration, I think you can play a little more declarative.
Yeah.
If it's like a prayer, I just want to be where you are. I mean, it's just kind of, you want to get you don't want to be driving that song. It's a gentle song. So look at the lyrics, and develop your part. Let those kind of drive the part you're going to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I love to talk about, because it's changed my life. Like one of the very first things I ever learned how to use was this little guy here, capo. It's for some people it's a way to cheat. You can play up and down the neck. You change your keys without having to really change what you're playing ultimately chord wise. And so it's a great tool. But I want to talk in a second about tools, Don, just to kind of demonstrate how tools play a key part in not only your tone but your parts. I want to talk a little bit now about just using the tools that you have and actually coming to a situation like worship or a session or a live opportunity with the right tools is a real key. And for me, I've said this a number of times, but because we travel a lot, and especially with how much of a hassle it can be to travel with a lot of stuff, you can't always bring your favorite amps, you can't always bring your favorite guitars or multiple guitars, and so you end up trying to find the things that really create the atmosphere, the parts like we've been talking about, with the least amount of real estate in your travel gear. So I'm going to go back to a couple things that I as a worship leader, I use all the time, because, and I can talk about that in a second. When I lead worship at my church, I most often will lead with acoustic, depending on the number of players I have, because it frees me up a little bit more rhythmically to carry a band, and I'm not as worried about sounds and tones and parts like we've been talking about. I do play parts, but I'm a little more geared towards leading worship and facilitating what that is about, as opposed to trusting that that's what Don does when we travel with Don. So I'm less concerned about carrying a whole band. Then I can sit back and play.
Yes.
Go ahead, Don. Say it.
Yeah, I'm going to say it because I love the tones that Tom has on his guitar. So I love him traveling with us. But when I put him on electric guitar, inevitably I'm gonna, because he's also singing it with me. So he's covering the tenor part. So I'll be singing and I won't hear a tenor part, and I'll look behind me and there's Tom with his foot on the pedal board or trying to turn something to adjust his sounds. And I always say, I'm going to take you off electric guitar and put you back on acoustic, because when he's on acoustic guitar, I could always count on him. His vocal is always there, but you give him an electric.
That happened like twice, but he's never going to forget it or let me forget about it.
But he's always tweaking sounds. But it's true. I mean, as a worship leader, you got a pedal board, and you're always having to tweak your sounds. With acoustic.
Absolutely.
Easier to lead worship probably, because you can drive it more.
And I'll give you an example, like with the capo. And obviously, when a little disclaimer here, but our explanation, using capos is awesome, but tuning becomes an issue, and placement. And I'm going to demonstrate this because a lot of people will capo over the middle of a fret, and that works fine. And once you tune it, if you have a good capo, it's fine. This is a great one. It's a Diodario capo, and I do love it. And it has a tension adjustment on it, which is the reason I use it as the main capo. And then this is one of my best friends here, the guys at Kaiser have made for me. The cut capo has been one of my best friends since it came on the market. Mitch Bohannon, who pitched this to these guys at Kaiser. It's one of the best tools. Guys were cutting off capos forever to create this, or turning capos upside down, or a real capo to get this. But what it does is it gives you dad-gad fingering by placing the capo on. But I want to demonstrate two capos, placing it as close to the fret as I can so that it's the least amount of tension on the string. And the tension adjustment here on this capo is awesome because it allows me, like there, I don't have to change the tuning a lot right now. So it's fairly in tune just by placing it well, and I've got the tension adjusted so that it's not overdoing it. In the middle, it automatically pulls the string down more, so tuning becomes an issue. So with a capo as a leader, I'm in the key of E now. But I'm playing in a D fingering, so that's nice and open. And so with just a tad of a delay, I can lead a song. That's not even a song, but you could hear how, if that were a worship song I were getting into, I'm carrying it, kind of like I would an acoustic. So a lot of leaders that lead from electric end up finding that a capo, minimal effects right now, I'm not dialing any special tones in. I've usually, if I'm leading, I've got a couple of key sounds, unless I have integral parts in songs that I'm using. So that just creates a simple way to lead from electric. Using the capo here, like I said, now we talked about parts, and one way to make parts interesting is to find different places to either inversions, which I would encourage you. One of the best things I ever did, I had a guitar teacher early on here in Nashville at Belmont University that helped me understand the importance of finding ways to play the same chord up and down the neck of the guitar. So we're not going to go into a lot of that now, but I will encourage you to go, Google is your friend, Google chord inversions, and you'll find more inversions than you'll ever be able to play in your lifetime. And you can use them accordingly then, and rather than being overwhelmed by the theory of it, I would select a few things that then become important. I remember somebody, way back, I bought my first guitar from a guy who's a great player, and he just showed me that inversion of an E minor chord, you know, and I've always loved it and now it's, as opposed to just playing a straight E minor, you know, just the difference in how that sounds. Same up here. Those become, and I'll show you what it sounds like in the key of E. But when you learn an inversion, you're going to learn to play a C here and here. You'll go up and down the neck, and you'll find the positions to play the same chord. Then when you're creating a part, now you're a lot more interesting. Let's say there are two guitar players in the band. One of the first things I'm doing is listening to who's going to put this on first. So if a guy's going to a part, and I hear he's not even thinking about a capo, I may go, okay, we're in the key of E here. Or whatever key you're in, I may capo up to the 5th fret because I like. And all of a sudden, that part that you might come up with in whatever key you're playing becomes a little more interesting because you're not fighting for the same sonic space. So a capo is brilliant to help you find, it's a tool that you can use at the right time to create a lot more interesting parts. And now you're naturally playing in a different inversion, whether you know it or not. Just because you've capoed and you're playing in the right key, you're playing a different inversion of the chord. And an example of that is if I were playing in the key of E, I could do this, the famous worship key of E. 90% of the worship songs forever were in that key. And if I didn't want to always be playing it, you know, with the bar chord here or down there like that, I could play it with E. And then if I had a drop D, I can turn it down, and now that's nice. And speaking of the drop D, the cut capo gives you the ability, like I said, to do dad-gad fingering. So let's take it off to give you the proper demonstration. In the key of E, I'm playing dad-gad fingering with one exception. If you're used to dad-gad tuning, I could detune the guitar and show you, but you're stretching to hit that G chord. Well, here you can play your normal G. You don't have to stretch anymore, but I'm in the key of E, so I can use dad-gad fingering. So it's a nice open inversion, open sounding chord, so I use it anytime I'm leading. I've always got this with me, and actually wherever I'm playing, doing anything, I've always got it because it gives me a unique color. But the beautiful thing to me is without you having to know all these fingerings in dad-gad, you immediately start playing your normal chords and fingering, and they all work. But when you want the drop, so it would be the equivalent of a drop D, but you're in the key of E, so you've got the low E. So a lot of country music you'll hear. So it's just a nice little tool, and then I do this a lot, all the time. I'm always moving up and down the neck. So now I've got two capos, which makes tuning even more fun. So you hear the tension gets off, so you have to tweak. And in this case, it's not clamped well, so you work till you can hear every string. And then you kind of know you have the attention, so now. Or if I'm doing more atmospheric. So the important thing is to remember that you have a lot of tools at your disposal. I carry a slide, I carry an EBow. I don't always have to use them, but they're there in case I need them. I want to take a second to say that even technology, I know in worship settings, not everybody has the ability to set up an amp on stage. I would say a majority of churches these days have an amp somewhere off stage and out of the room to control noise, which is totally fine. And the way that you work around those things as part of your tools is that you, like in this case, I've got an amp here, and it's on stage right behind me. If I were in even in this setting, it works. But if in a live band setting it was too much, I could set it off the entire amp, or I could use an extension cabinet and use the head here so that I have control of my amp, but the speaker's being mic'd somewhere off down the road there. So that's a way to utilize some of the tools you have. The floorboards. So this is a pedal board. It's what a lot of players have, just a normal pedal board with whatever colors you like. These are all tools that I can use. If you're in a setting, let's say, where you don't have the ability to have an amp and multiple pedals, some of the floorboards that are out there, like the Pod HD 500 is a pretty amazing unit in what you can accomplish with no amp at all. You just literally plug into a board, feed it into a system, and you rely completely on your monitoring environment, whether it's in-ears or a wedge. Now you're using technology in a different way, but those are tools that you can use. And my point is, if you are in a setting where it calls for you being creative, find the tools that work for what you're doing, so that you can get the most out of it. As a guitar player, I love to hear air moving and feel it moving. I love what we can do with direct sounds, but I also have never been able to fully replace an amp. But Line 6 is a great example. They've created not just the floorboard, but a floorboard that interacts with an amplifier. And so you're not losing now the tube air compression moving behind you. You have both technologies working for you at the same time, but you have to prepare yourself and know how to use those tools. Otherwise, it's a maze. And so finding the stuff that you can use, learning how to make it work for what you do is the key. And as an example, I've traveled with a fair number of worship leaders, but also other kinds of artists, where it could be a setting where you have to be able to call up an entire night set where everything's programmed to, you just need some staple sounds to cover the basics and flow more, which is a lot of worship environments. And so being prepared for either one of those, if that's what I'm doing, is important. If I show up and I'm not prepared to do this gig over here because I don't have all the switching stuff, or I haven't taken time to program all of the sounds and store them so that I can recall them at the click, of a foot, then I'm ill prepared. And I think that's one of the things that we could improve on in our technology and our tools, is that we know how to use the tools we bring. It's not enough that you just have a bunch of pedals glued to a board. It's really important that you kind of know what each one of them does. You know their personality. And the reason I have 5 or 6 overdrives on one pedal is every amp sounds different with a pedal. And with each pedal, I change. And so I stand a good chance of being able to have a sound that works for me by having 5 overdrives. It's not because I like all the colors. So as much as I'll have on here, I'm only using 1 or 2 overdrives ever at a time, usually just one, period. And sometimes a slight little boost that I would have in conjunction, which is not a saturated tone, but one pedal works better with a Vox, one pedal works better with a Fender amp, one works better with a Marshall. So here again, those are all tools. Capos are your tools. Guitars are tools. Learn how to use the tools you have.
I'd like to just have you address the issue of stage volume? I mean, because you talk about the fact that you love to have an amp on a stage with you, but a lot of times when you're standing up playing, the amp is going by your knees. The volume is shooting out to the audience, and depending on the size of the church, you're going to see people in the first 5 rows going, that guitar amp is killing me. But that's your sound. So how do you deal with an environment like that? Because a lot of people, watching this DVD are probably in much smaller settings.
Yeah.
How do you still get the good sounds and play at the right a lower volume on stage?
Yeah. Well, you really just have a couple of alternatives. I'll start with the normal one is placement of amplifiers in proximity to the stage. So if that's an issue on stage and you have the ability to put the amp in another room, let's say, or a closet and get it away from you, that's an easy solution or easier solution. Right. Then your volume may still be able to run at your normal level, but because it's down the road a ways or in a room or below in the basement of your church, wherever you have to put it to mic it, it's like a studio environment. You're controlled, and that works. So that's the typical solution, but there are others. One other one is that they have attenuators that you could buy that would allow you to take full volume out of your amp. It sends it into an attenuator, dials it down without losing your tone, and then sends it to your speaker. And that's a way to get similar sounds, if not some of the same sounds, without having the level of volume on stage, but have it manageable without compromising your tone. So that's another solution.
Do you ever tip your guitar facing up toward your ears, or do you? I mean, does that help?
Well, on most stages, because that's a good example or a good question, Don, because most stages that we're in, we always have amps right here. We're never running an amp off stage in any of our settings. So it's so there are things you can do to hear better and minimize volume. One would be to do that. I typically don't. I have over the years, like you say, it's a small club or some kind of situation or a small church that you have. The old Fender amps had the little arms. You could rock them back and tilt them up. These days, one of the things that's easiest to do is turn the amp around or face it in another direction so that it's not coming into the mics. But that's a good question, because one of the key things that you would get, because I'm always singing, if I tilt an amp, now I'm blowing, the sound is going up towards the mic. Yeah. So that's not the best solution for me. Yeah. Another solution that you can use, and that's here again back to the technology, we demonstrate often what a silent stage is like, and that's where there's nothing live going on stage, and it's amazing at how good the tone can be with the technology that you employ on stage. And the way you do that is you buy the proper equipment on the floor that can feed a direct signal, and they have amp models already, mic models. It allows you to really choose your combination of mic speakers, so you can really dial it in. But that's the point. With that technology, you really have to do your homework and dial the sound in ahead of time, and then you can combat that whole noise problem and have what you want. And here again, critical is the in-ear listening.
Monitors. Yeah. So I hope this has been helpful. It makes me want to take my guitar out again, and maybe the next time you see me, I'll be playing with a guitar rather than a piano. It's what I used to do, by the way. You have no idea what an extremely good guitarist I am, Tom.
I do, and I know you have a great guitar to play.
So maybe before we finish, how about if we do just a little bit of the Mi Corazon? You can do a solo in there where you're singing and playing. I always love that moment. Let's see. Let's take it from the... Yeah, you ready? So take it from I will give you glory, tell a wondrous story, how you rescued me. I'm the guilty one, but you sacrificed yourself, you're one and only. Now I stand before you, blameless and holy. Play it, Tommy. to keep going. Hey, it's been great being with you today, Tom Lane. Thanks a million. If you need more information, at the end of this video, we'll let you know how you can reach Tom. Or there's a lot of good resources out there. Or go to our website, always DonMoen.com. Been fun being with you today. I hope this has been helpful. God bless you all. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Don.